welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and comment. In this episode, we're going to have our first inspiration deep dive.
SciFi.
And now it's time to get our gaming fix.
Was that too much?
Maybe just a little.
I'm Chris from All Things Good and Nerdy, a proud member of the Good and Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. Today, we are going to have our first inspirational deep dive. But before we do that, a few quick announcements. First off, you may have noticed that there have been some missing co-hosts over the past few months, episodes, weeks, whatever. And we did not eat anyone. We are not cannibals here. When winter comes and we get snowed in out at our woodland lodge, whatever you want to call this thing that we live in. Chateau Juhas. That is actually how it is labeled for when we do events here. We may have to eat someone then, but we have not done that yet. So we've had some schedule conflicts and that kind of stuff going on, as is like to happen with people being adults and jobs and whatever. And so there's been some issues coordinating things to get people here, there, and everywhere. And but we're working on getting that worked out and getting our regular rotating cast through, so you don't have to hear me and Lacey ramble.
What do you mean you don't have to hear us ramble on?
Well, you can hear someone else ramble with us, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
They enjoy the rambling, but we need to create a break for them so it's not to overload them with joy.
You can't redline it the whole time.
Right.
You have to back it down.
You got to dial it back so you can appreciate it.
So that's the first announcement, is that we are working to get those schedules worked out and get everybody back here. Second thing is that we have some new projects coming up that we're going to add to our Patreon page as well. So there's...
What are they?
You broke my train of thought. So first off is there was a Dread game that was ran by Lacey.
Oh, I did that. It was a thing. It was fun.
Was that last Halloween? When was that?
It was not just this past Halloween.
Before that, though.
The Halloween of 2016.
Right. And so the questionnaires and some of the props that you can print out and use are going to get uploaded on there along with a brief... Well, I guess you should just say what we're going to put up there, because I really don't even know what it is, to be honest.
Okay. If you're not familiar with Dread, first of all, shame on you. Go back and listen to our review. Secondly, if you are familiar with Dread, you'll know that you will need character questionnaires. And so I have all of said questionnaires that you will need to run this scenario, as well as a layout of NPCs for the estate general plot line. And I had a picture, but I kind of stole it off the interwebs, so I'm going to have to come up with something else for them to use for a puzzle. But that shouldn't be too terribly difficult,
right?
Along with an actual picture of an estate, which we might just sub our house in for if we get a good black and white photo of it. It would work well enough.
We're going to work.
We'll figure something out for that. But basically, you're going to have the character surveys already filled out to hand off to your players, a layout of the plot, and a cast of NPCs.
Very good. As well as that, we are working to finish up and add detail to the vampire city that we worked on several episodes past. I think it's 47 or something along those lines. I'm not sure. But if you just search Vampire the Masquerade, it'll bring it up. And we're going to flesh out our characters that we made for that, as well as fleshing out the city, developing those NPCs some more, and adding some more plot hooks into that game, and release that as well there as well. And if there's enough interest in it, and you guys can kind of playtest a little bit and give us some feedback on it, I think it may get developed into something that will go into the Storyteller's Vault if I have the time to do that, which is accessible through DriveThruRPG. And we'll credit everybody that helps us playtest that if it does have enough interest that way, and we can move forward with that. So some additional things to come forward on our Patreon to make available to you guys to say thank you for supporting us. And yeah.
And if you're not already there, I believe our actual play is on the Patreon now. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's an actual play of us playing Blood in the Chocolate, ran by Kyle Chenier, the writer and designer from Lamentations of the Flame Princess that did that. That one has been up there for several weeks now, I think almost a month maybe, and that is going to be getting released sometime. I think Friday is my plan is to release that. So we don't hold back any content, generally speaking, that we put out. But it does come out there on our Patreon first, just depending on how release schedules go, as well as all the raw audio feeds and all that kind of stuff as well, if you're interested in that kind of stuff. So lots of more cool stuff to come to our Patreon as we just continue to develop it and add more things to it. To say thank you, guys. Thank you to all of you for your support.
And as a recap, be like Todd and go be a Patreon supporter.
Yes, be awesome like Todd and his
underground gaming bunker.
Exactly. All right, so I guess we're just going to jump right into this one now. At Gen Con 50, we reached deep into our inspirational sack.
Yeah, we did.
And each of us drew a genre or topic, I guess you might say. And we thought we might develop a game around it to maybe spark some inspiration and give you guys some different sources of inspiration for other games to see what ideas you might come up with. And also, we just kind of like brainstorming around the table and coming up with some cool ideas for games and whatnot. That's one of the things that I actually like and enjoy to do the most. I think it's fun. That Worms episode we did was a whole lot of fun. So we don't really have a format for this yet. So I guess, Lacey, you are going to set the format for how we do this from now on, I guess.
Excellent.
So you got...
My topic was sci-fi.
Which is kind of funny because you don't even really like sci-fi.
This is true, which was actually the first thing I was going to talk about. So the sci-fi genre and I'm not going to say I don't like anything that's sci-fi because that's too broad of a statement. I mean, I've watched Star Wars. It's okay. I watched Star Trek, mostly The Next Generation. It's all right. But it doesn't speak to me in the way that, paranormal romance does.
Okay. I'm sorry.
I'm kidding about that. I've never read paranormal romance in my life. But anyhow, so sci-fi, not really my thing for the most part. So then I was kind of thinking about how best to explore it since, okay, so just I guess, for our generation, the most common way that you are initially exposed to a topic is usually through some sort of media. Right. So I kind of thought, and I was like, well, I haven't really read a lot of sci-fi books. I've read a handful, just more like to say that I did. Mm-hmm. I read the Ex Machina short story, which is actually nothing like the movie at all, even slightly.
Right.
I'm forgetting the author's name right now. Hold on, I've got it on the shelf right over here. I'm going to go grab it. Right. So basically the only sci-fi material I'd ever read were short stories by Henry Kuttner, who is like this famous sci-fi guy, basically, but he doesn't get a lot of credit because he wrote under more than dozens of different pseudonyms. There is an intro about it here, but like most of the sci-fi stories used to come out in like serials,
right? Kind
of. So he wrote under several different names for several different copies of these things that would come out. And so it was a lot of work, I guess, collecting all of these different stories. But he's a pulp science fiction writer.
Right.
So like those stories were okay. They weren't something that I would say really spoke to me necessarily, though.
Right.
So when we got into doing this, I was like, well, I'm going to pick something and dedicate myself to it in the sci-fi genre. And it happened to be right around the time that Brian Aldiss died. And so a bunch of people had been tweeting about him, and I had never read one of his stories.
So for those of you who don't know who Brian Aldiss is.
Brian Aldiss is another famous author. And for our purposes, we're just going to say that he wrote the story Frankenstein Unbound, because that's the one I decided to read. Mostly because I like the story Frankenstein, which is Victorian age science fiction. Is that fair? I mean, they are like bringing a man back to life.
I suppose that would count as science fiction for the time, I guess.
Right. So all a matter of perspective, right?
I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
So I read Frankenstein Unbound for this series.
And is it one novel or what is it?
It is one novel.
One novel,
yes.
Okay.
It's fairly short. It was published in 1973 and set, I believe, in the year 2021.
Were there flying cars?
No.
Oh.
No.
Dang it.
There was some other technology.
Right.
It's not really what I would call too far. There's nothing super far-fetched in it, except in this story, humanity has successfully poked too many holes into the outer space. And that had, as you might imagine, unintended consequences. And as a result of this, there are now time slips that have happened. So basically, certain places jump through time for a set amount of time and then jump back to the present day.
Like geographic locations?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like the west side of Indianapolis is now suddenly in the year 1700 in Scotland.
Okay.
Oh, and now it's back. But there's also this sheep here. And so things are just kind of like breaking down and falling apart. So we join our faithful narrator and primary character, Joseph Bodenland. And so he has a family back in the regular good old time period of 2021. And one of these time slips happens, and he is a curious man. And so initially, the first one lasts for like a whole day, I believe. Like it's like that, and then overnight, and then they wake up in the morning and things are back to normal. So when the second one happens, he decides to take his car and venture out and see what's there, except that time has become unpredictable. And in this one, the time slip only lasts for 20 minutes. And so he's stranded in time and he doesn't know where he's at. Well, come to find out, he is in the area where the Frankenstein novel is set. And in this weird twist of fate, he meets Victor Frankenstein, realizes what's happening, and then he goes out, but it's also set in like real time too. So it's like time has messed up and now this fictional character is real, but the creator of the fictional character is also real. So in the text, he also meets Mary Shelley, as well as her poet husband and Lord Byron. So you get these cool, like notable historical figures that he interacts with in the story. And Aldous does a very good job of writing in their voices and then also in his own voice. It's very interesting how he, depicts them in the conversation. I thought it was very cool. And then there's this whole like love scene with him and Mary Shelley, which I thought was honestly completely unnecessary, but whatever. And then he goes off like in hunt of Victor because he knows how this tragedy is going to end basically. And he's trying to stop Frankenstein's monster, and he gets all caught up in this thing.
That seems like a terrible idea.
So that's my synopsis of the story.
Okay, so let me add, because I haven't read this, and just for everyone, we actually haven't discussed anything prior to this, right? So my thought was that we kind of go back and forth. So are you looking at this book in terms of like inspiration for like building a game around that story, or
what I was really looking for were just some core ideas in this book that I liked.
Okay.
Because I don't like sci-fi very much. So I was trying to find something in this story that was a common thread in sci-fi themes that I did like.
Okay.
And that I could hold on to.
So most people, especially gamers, I would say, I think it's fair to say that their first encounter with science fiction is probably Star Trek, Star Wars, or 40K. 40K kind of being, I mean, it takes place science fiction, but
it's not really as big as Star Wars.
No. But like a lot of people, like if you get into gaming, maybe you encountered it through wargaming or the novels or whatever, right? It's not nearly as big as those two intellectual properties, but those are the kind of
like Games Workshop is kind of a huge,
right? The Power 3, I would say, and those all three of those really are pretty drastically different in tone and themes. So it's kind of cool to see something from outside of that normal wheelhouse, right? So what about this book spoke to you as science fiction?
Well, it's definitely science fiction, right? But I'm going to tell you the ideas about it that I liked, okay?
She has notes.
I do. So I have here as my inspirational quote, right? The Curse of Baron Frankenstein by Shelley. And it says, "By seeking to control too much, we have lost control of ourselves." So I think that for me is a very core theme in the science fiction genre.
Oh, wow. So it takes like you exactly what you said before about Frankenstein being a science fiction story for the time. Basically, he's trying to mankind's power over science to control the natural world.
And then that spins out of control.
And that's exactly what's happening here.
That theme is reflected in the Frankenstein Unbound story because man is trying to control the climate and control everything that is happening in their surroundings and basically master time.
Yeah, so he's trying to control time as well.
Right.
Is he trying to control the time, or is he just trying to manipulate
Well,
it?
he's not doing any of it. He just lives in a time period
where this is happening.
Okay. And, as we try to control technology, and he talks about, like the age of the railroad, and that's when time really becomes relevant to begin with. And ever since then, like we're on this wheelhouse where science is basically like the new religion or what have you. And we're just trying to control more and more. In this time period, nuclear war is what sets it off, but it's torn apart the very infrastructure of space itself. And so the other key point I like about this story, which I think would be so fun to bring into an RPG, is the idea that time is now unreliable because there are these things that are called time slips in this story. And there's a lot of, questions of what's real and what's not in sci-fi, but it seemed like time is one of those inherent things we think we can always rely on, until daylight saving time happened. And then we realize how powerless we really are.
Or for those of us that live near a line of time zone, because we're all time travelers.
And just that is amplified even farther in this story because the entire setting is not dependable. The time, the location, reality itself is broken and can fluctuate at any point to something different. And I think you see some time travel RPGs like your Doctor Who RPG, right? But in general, they're in control of, to some degree, of where they're going, and they can leave at a set time. And I think it's interesting to put people in a scenario where there is time travel, but you have absolutely no control of it. And I haven't seen that done before, and I think it would be really fun.
Well, there's some ideas that I played with as well when you're talking about time being unreliable and some things like that. I really like the idea of surrealism and have thought of that as a way to sort of impose that feeling onto a game. And I think it's a really cool, intriguing idea.
Well, they touch on something like that in the Changeling the Lost game, where they talk about
the
hedge time versus actual time.
Right.
And that is always a tricky concept, too. And then you end up with an interesting meld of characters because you can have these people from this time and these people from this time, which is neat. But I like the idea of dialing it up one step farther to just completely remove any control and safety that characters might have.
Right.
So another core idea was the idea of isolation and the loss of self. So in the story, our character Bodenland talks about how much his personality is tied to the things that he has, the things that he encounters every day. So when you remove him from his time period, from his element, from his family, what really is there that is left of himself? And I think that's a really cool idea.
Right.
So kind of thinking about those core ideas of what really makes your character so special, and if you were to be somewhere else, would those things still matter? And if they don't matter, were they really that
Special
important to begin with?
Right. Hang on, why don't we stop there? Because I have some questions about some of these.
I had one more quote to add because it's directly related to that, like as an example of this isolation and loss of self that he talks about. So he says, he had just come into this world and it's not going very well for him. So he says, I had lied, cheated, committed adultery, looted, thieved, and ultimately murdered. My only fit company was the two brutes who journeyed somewhere ahead of me. My only fit surroundings, the frigid winter lands of hell, which I now entered.
Wow, right on. So he's kind of like self-tortured in a way.
Yeah. He's very woe is me.
Well, it's very Frankenstein, to,
He's not like Frankenstein's character, though, because he has a certain sense of positivity to what he's doing, and he's looking at it with the greater good.
Maybe?
He's almost on the outside of the argument. Like if you're having the science versus nature argument, he's kind of looking at both sides of it and being like, okay, maybe we've gotten a little off track here. If anything, he's kind of rooting for nature.
All right, so I got a couple themes that you kind of touched on here. One is man versus nature, and really man being science, and man's trying to dominate the natural world through science and discovery and technology, right?
Right. And then that goes terribly wrong, which is basically the basis of every sci-fi story.
Well, pretty much every sci-fi horror story, for sure. So like
I
2001
may have
Space.
taken this in a sci-fi horror direction.
Well, that's fine. No, it's all part of it.
It is
But
what
like,
I like.
2001 is very clearly this, right? Man makes this super AI, becomes terribly dominant and overpowers humans. They're just over and over again. One of the ones I thought was interesting is like the self versus group thing, which is kind of an interesting idea anyway, because I don't know, you could put it in terms of like the Star Wars universe in a way, right? The group being like the Empire and conformity, right?
Mhm.
And that crushing force that is. And then the self being like the Jedi are very much, you know.
The Empire
or
in that story also represents technology itself and the control over nature, because even Darth Vader is basically a cyborg.
Yeah.
So you see that kind of melding with machinery, and the Death Star is this instrument that's destroying the natural world and is the size of a planet. It's kind of like replacing
Right.
that, and then you see the more natural force warriors that are the Jedi that are channeling some kind of, you know, like
faith,
natural force.
Faith or mysticism versus science, right? And you can touch on a lot of like religion versus science in that way too, if you really wanted to go down that path, if it suited your story or whatever. Right on. So
and that is mentioned in this story as well, the idea of religion. And the main character in the story is sort of a self-proclaimed, like, knowledgeable, non-religious man.
Well, I like the idea of something that just intrigues me in general in life, period, is like science as a religion. You know, I think it's kind of a cool concept because it has its own set of dogmas and that kind of stuff, you know, and I really find that idea kind of intriguing for where that line is, you know.
Well, this presented an interesting perspective that I hadn't encountered before. And it was the idea that God can actually be proven through the idea of something being inherently wrong. So when he's looking at Frankenstein's monster, he's thinking about the wrongness of this creature. And well, how do you know that that's wrong? So then that means there must be some sort of ideal right.
Oh, okay.
Some sort of ideal moral,
that's
natural right that is ingrained in people.
Okay.
And so that's sort of how he proves faith in God to himself, in that, okay, well, if this thing is absolutely 100% wrong, and it most certainly is, then there has to be something that's 100% right.
Did they ever explain how in their own universe how Frankenstein's monster works, whether it's like science actually animating him or is it something mystical animating him?
No, it's science.
Science animating him?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And electricity. But, you know.
Science, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, science.
So that's interesting because then you have...
And he actually elaborates in this, in that Frankenstein is not planning to stop there. Like, he has a series of other experiments, and even like taking notes and like body parts of children and infants, and
oh, wow.
like the Frankenstein's monster is not the conclusion of his studies. It's made very clear that he fully intends to continue experimenting with things.
Well, I don't know.
Because that's just how his personality is driven.
It's been too long since I've read or even looked at the Frankenstein story, right? But I have been rewatching Penny Dreadful again because it's awesome. And in that, there's this line that the monster has in it where he's talking to Frankenstein and he says, "I am the future. Look upon me, your new master." You know, and he's not speaking to him like you as an individual. I mean, he is in that sense as well, but he also is doing it also in the sense that you as mankind,
right,
and I am your new master.
Right.
And is that in the book, the regular book as well? Or is that just something that they did in Penny Dreadful? I can't remember. It may be. I don't know.
I'm not recalling now. I know that he wants him to make his wife. It's been a while since I've read this story.
So... But it's an interesting thought on like the evolutionary process, whether we metamorphosize as from people into Frankenstein's monster, right? And that's the next step of evolution, and like that moral slide, I guess you're kind of implying by becoming, because he's called monster, right? You're implying that there's a certain lack of morality and wrongness in the monster. So it's kind of a cool concept to explore as well with science and science fiction, or however you want to say that. Right on. So what's next?
In this story, and it kind of got me thinking about other science fiction movies that I've seen, there's the idea of increasing strangeness to create a sense of urgency within the story. So you see this, like Alien movie is a good example, right? So they get there, they see a ship, the ship is wrecked. Okay, not that strange. You get on board. the ship is empty,
Right.
And the strangeness increases as you go. The setting becomes more and more out of balance, and then more and more things are going wrong.
Right.
And you see that in a lot of other things as well.
Increase tension and to take you out of your comfort zone in your world and put you into a world that you don't know and aren't comfortable with.
And something else that you see there is that as you get farther and farther away from the original idea, you have these remnants of the former that pop up to highlight the strangeness. So when they're talking about like Frankenstein and he's moving on and farther chasing this monster, and the terrain is becoming more and more unfamiliar, but then all of a sudden he sees like this small hut or this small village. It's something that is not as far out, but it tacked onto this strange new scenery in a way that you realize how very different it is from where you were before. So it's sort of that, here's a token of something from home to kind of remind you of everything that you've left behind now that you're in this new world.
What you're risking,
That's most about that. I think I had one more quote. Just something that I found was interesting. I don't know that it's relevant to anything, but I just really appreciated it.
Fair enough.
So it's consciousness had never evolved as an instrument designed to discover truth. It was a tool to hunt down a mate the next meal. So I just thought it was an interesting statement about humans in general, like all these things that we've decided to do with our giant big brains, and maybe that's not really what we were supposed to be doing with them, but that's kind of where we find ourselves.
Right.
I think in science fiction stories, you see a lot of that drive without purpose almost. So you're constantly driven to do more and find more and see more and create more without necessarily knowing why. It's just sort of like discovery and ingenuity without reason. So you're just creating the next thing, even if you don't really need to have the thing.
Mm-hmm. So
does that make sense?
Advancing things just for the sake of advancing them, not because of any real purpose or reason.
Right. Yeah, just to see if you could.
Right. Right on. That's kind of like why a lot of the AI thing in a lot of movies happens. It's just like, what's what we did, and then it had all these unintended consequences.
The conversation about AI is very much a Promethean Man conversation.
Well, yeah, because you could very easily substitute Frankenstein for AI, and that's it. There you go. And then actually there is a sort of implied, there's a lot of people that have a lot of fear of AI, and I think in some ways rightfully so, it sounds like. But like you have Elon Musk, who is just like, calls it, waking a sleeping demon, and he's very like uses very big alliteration, to kind of like express how big of a deal it is, and I think you could very easily transpose the two from Frankenstein to AI. Actually, in the movie Ex Machina, the what was her name? The girl that's in it?
Don't recall.
But the robot, essentially, the android that's there, she essentially is Frankenstein in a lot of ways.
Oh, she's an assemblage of parts that he's thrown together and given life to. She's exactly the Frankenstein's monster. He even has a whole closet full of unused parts that you find later.
The only difference, though, is that there's no... It sort of severs the initial morality piece of it with it being pieces of dead bodies and discarded bodies. So that's the only real difference that you're dealing with there, is because it's not like when you build an android and put an AI in it, in a sense... that piece of it, there's no moral attachment to it, because it's not like, that's Larry's arm and, Phil's shoulder and whatever, So, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting and cool comparison to play with there. So do you want to talk about and try to develop this into some sort of a setting, or do you have other things to talk about, or?
I had a couple of other side things just to throw out there that I thought were interesting, but this was my core, like using this for plot inspiration piece. Right. Maybe I should have started with the other smaller things. I don't know.
Right on. All right. Well, why don't we leave that where it's at, and then we'll do the other two small ones you have, and then we'll kind of bring it all back together.
All right,
if that's possible. I don't know if it is, but we'll give it a shot.
Lovely. Okay, so in the vein of the Frankenstein's monster story, I was scrolling along and came across a cool National Geographic science story that I thought was interesting, and it was about how Albert Einstein's brain was stolen.
Did I share this on Twitter?
You might have. I mean,
think I did.
I found it. Nat Geo Science posted it, and I read it, and then shared it, and I think you may have reshared it. But anyway, so it was from National Geographic, and apparently, when Einstein died, he wanted his remains to be cremated, and he didn't want any kind of big to do about it. Well. Instead of doing that,
someone stole his brain.
Someone stole his brain.
The autopsy guy?
I believe it was the autopsy doctor.
Right.
Yes. I'm not remembering his name right this moment, but we're going to link to the article so you can read it. It's a fairly short read. He does get caught, and Albert Einstein's son ends up actually giving him permission to keep the brain and to use it only for scientific research.
Of course, not to clone. Or do anything nefarious like that, right?
So the rest of the story doesn't really matter. Right. I just thought, man, what if somebody was building a Frankenstein's monster and they also had Albert Einstein's brain?
Oh my God. That's wicked cool.
Because that's what I had just read. So I thought,
no longer are we dealing with like the whaling sailor that was drunk at the bar and got in a fight and got stabbed. And that's whose brain we get. We have Albert Einstein's brain. That's scary.
So that was just my small plot hook. That was fun that you could definitely do something with. So just think about Einstein's brain has gone missing and all the fun things that could happen as a result of someone having Einstein's brain. Whether you want to use that for your dust tactics game and the crazy Germans now have Albert Einstein's brain and are going to make some kind of awesome giant gorilla creature.
Right. Marcus with the,
super smart.
Yeah. Marcus or the Blute Cruise with the Einstein brain. That's cool.
So, that's definitely something you could do. Or what have you. And so
we should put Dust on the review list.
I thought we did it at one point.
I don't know. I don't think so.
RPG?
We've mentioned it, but we haven't reviewed it. So anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay. So one of the other things I liked was just an image because I was trying to find some different media. So there was one simple news article, an actual story, and then I found some art. So on the DeviantArt page, there's posted an image called Rust Hour, and it is by Sad Delira.
It's TSAD.
Yeah, but it's pronounced sad.
Right. But I'm just spelling it for people so they can, if you want to Google his stuff.
We're gonna link that too.
Yeah, we'll link it. But
and do you have that image that you can pull up?
Yeah, I
real
pulled
quick
it up.
just
It's right
to
in
look
front of me
at.
here.
So I really like this one. It kind of reminded me of what's the superhero movie with the guy with the smiley face button and the Rorschach guy.
Rorschach. That's the Watchmen.
Rorschach. Yeah. Okay. So the Watchmen, and there's like this big bad guy, but then he has this weird like little smiley face button out of nowhere. So this image kind of reminded me of that. So you see sort of just this classic kind of sci-fi setting, and then this girl in, her airtight space suit, but then she has like this happy little like AI familiar that's floating around with her. And she also has a little bit of flair to her as well, in that she's got that smiley face button.
Office Space reference. I see what you did there. So she looks like she has a I Heart New York, I Heart NY button, a smiley face button, and
I believe that one is like a hand doing the rock, like bullhorns symbol.
Yeah. Right on. Okay.
And her face mask has a mouth painted on it with a tongue sticking out.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yeah. So I liked just the idea of taking your hardcore, regular, everyday spacesuit character and just giving them a little bit of flavor. Just like
it's not so sterilized.
Yeah. I mean, that's what people do, right? Like that's what
Yeah. Well,
we're weird and quirky, and there's no reason that you should lose those things.
Well, but not only that, I think when you're like an astronaut in NASA, you don't do that to your stuff because not everybody has a spacesuit, right? But like when everybody has a car, you put
you get one with stupid bumper stickers on it.
Right, you put bumper stickers on it, and you put the fuzzy dice from the mirror or whatever it is that you do, but you customize it, make it your own because everybody has one. So now I want this one to be mine. I want it to feel like this is my car. This is my spacesuit.
So my plan was to actually create an NPC for this image and to post it on the Patreon as well. So if you want access to that, I'm going to be creating an NPC to go around this image.
Right on. Well,
I'm open for debate on what the system should be for that, but
I think we should just probably make a personality and not make.
No, I want to make a character, like a whole actual character.
Okay, well, I think
Don't tell me what to do.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, what I meant is not to put stats with it. Do you know what I'm saying? But to like make a character like Fate style.
So
or
you
whatever.
want me to write a paragraph backstory for this person?
I don't know.
It's not as interesting.
I think Fate characters are the most interesting characters you generally make, and that's only like 5 sentences. I'm
With
just
stats
saying.
Also.
Well, I mean, outside of that stuff, but
Okay, so my very last source of inspiration, and something I actually enjoy and hadn't really thought of as being sci-fi before, but now that I look at it, it is pretty abundantly science fiction, is a cartoon from the 90s called Invader Zim. And some of you guys may not know this. If you don't, you should. But Invader Zim is still alive as a graphic novel. And it is produced by Oni Press.
mm-hmm. They were at Gen Con last year.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. They had a booth, and Invader Zim stuff was there. The artist was there.
Excellent.
So
I've read Volume 1 and Volume 2. My current source of inspiration, though, comes from Volume 2, Chapter 2. Let's crack it open. So there are two things. The first one is just the basis of this story is pretty simple, right? So Zim is being Zim, and he crashes himself into a planet and lands there. And there are unintended consequences, which I think is another common theme in sci-fi, right? Because we talked about you're creating stuff just to create stuff. And so then you have unintended consequences. So in this, his ship leaks some like radioactive ooze, and as a result, a planet that previously had no life now suddenly springs to life, and there are little creatures. They evolve at a rapid rate and suddenly start worshiping Zim. But the key idea that I liked was the giant unintended consequences.
Right.
The second thing that I take from Invader Zim that you see everywhere in the story is just the license to create ridiculous sounding tools, weapons, what have you.
Anything.
And very few things do it as well as this story does. So at the very beginning, he's talking about how he went to he survived Blastropolis, the most violent battle mall in all of known space. So basically he went shopping on Black Friday at the battle mall. And they give you this list of just like really fun sounding weapons that I think you could take and actually use and then create stats for, and it would be just wicked hilarious and fun. So you have the Squidgetomic launchers, the Galaxis Zorm rifles, the Pluthuvian rocket fists, and a Schlughorgian Dookie Nightmare pod.
Dookie Nightmare pod. Okay.
Indeed.
Fair enough.
So that is what I picked Invader Zim for.
Right on.
So do with that what you can.
Alrighty. Well, I think. Well, one thing I think
if you
that
find
is.
some kind of. I thought this would be better than that. I don't know. I just feel like I'm rambling on. But...
No. I think we're good. One thing I think it is cool, is, even if you don't like Invader Zim, right? I think there is one common thread for a lot of science fiction that Invader Zim addresses. Now, Invader Zim may not be classic sci-fi when you would think of science fiction, right? But a lot of science fiction, not to put too fine a point on it, but it takes itself too seriously sometimes, and it's the same problem that horror has, is that with horror, if you don't have downbeats, you can't build the tension and the suspense in horror, right? And I think the same thing is true in science fiction, in that if you are trying to build towards a climax, right, and you're trying to make something that has gravity and is very important, right, you can't have every moment of the story be super serious and nail-biting, because you can't maintain that kind of emotional fever pitch, right? And Invader Zim is 100% ridiculous, but it shows you in some kind of a way how to maintain genre, I guess, and theme, but not take it so seriously. So it has the aliens, it has the unintended consequences and all this kind of stuff, right? All those pieces that make things science fiction, but it treats them with a lightheartedness to make things a little less serious. And I think you can also draw that back to that artwork that you had, right? Because while she customizes her own spacesuit, makes it cool,
it's a little bit silly.
And it's a way to sort of ease the tension so that you can, bring things back so you can build it back up, right? Do you think that's fair to say? I don't know that you did that intentionally, but just sort of one of the things that as I look at all these pieces of media and stuff side by side and trying to draw them together, that's one of the first things that I see. So while you may not even be a fan of Invader Zim, or you may not even know what it is, but basically it's just a ridiculous cartoon in the vein of 90s cartoons, essentially, right?
And it is kind of purposely poking fun.
Oh yeah,
at sci-fi,
absolutely,
and you see that with the character Dib,
right?
Who is the crazy wackadoo alien conspiracy theorist who is constantly losing to Zim,
right? So those are the immediate things that jump out to me. I mean, we kind of talked about the comparison with the AI and Frankenstein already, which I think is really, really cool. And in a way, I know we mentioned putting Einstein's brain into Frankenstein's body, but isn't that just making an AI?
But better.
Because if you've already got the super smart computer brain in an AI, right?
Right.
In an android, that's essentially what you're doing with Einstein. If you want to compare Einstein's brain to the average person, it may as well be an AI, right?
Well, the other reason I like the idea of it is that you're not just taking anyone's brain. Like, you're not just making it better. You're stealing a piece of the best that humanity has to offer and using it in a way that is not human.
Perverting that and giving it to the other.
Right.
All of these stories, whether
it's not just like my brain, right? It's like it's freaking Einstein's brain.
Yeah. There's also a piece of that where it would have all of the secrets of humanity already as well, because if they have Einstein's brain, they know all the secrets that Einstein had, and then weapons that he had, come up with, and ideas and ways to extrapolate his own theories into destructive stuff, and whatever. And they would already have that, and then be able to prepare for that, knowing what the humans would bring to bear, but also extrapolate from that to make even better or more wicked, implements of destruction or whatever.
Well, I feel like it touches on some of the key points that like make us uncomfortable, right? So if a computer beats us at chess, we're okay with that. If a computer puts together a brilliant piano solo that's better than any pianist that we have,
right,
that touches us in a different way that, it's a little bit more disturbing, because we like to think that creativity is some sort of special thing that can't be analytically solved.
Right.
So, I think it just takes it one step farther in the perversion.
Mm. I like the idea of that, where you're taking things that would normally be considered outside of the realm of possibility for an artificial intelligence or whatever, because of those things about not having any human creativity or human inspiration or human faith, or what's the other word I'm looking for?
Which is like imagination.
Yeah.
Like there isn't, and I think that is a fun thing to play with too, right? Because lying is something that is very unique to humans for the most part, right? So, and it takes a certain amount of brain power and forethought, but it also takes a certain amount of creativity to be able to lie well.
Deception
and that's something we like to think that a computer wouldn't be able to do, and that's what makes it more safe.
That's something that you could probably play on. It's pretty interesting, because if you're playing in a science fiction game where there are robots of any level of competence or cognition, however you want to look at that, right? And more than likely, and this is even kind of portrayed in Star Wars and whatnot, and Star Trek with Data, that there's no inherent deception in what the droids or Data is doing, right? It's all, childlike in a way. Like if there is deception, it's innocent. It's childlike. It's not because there was some higher level of manipulation going on. It was just all very innocent and whatever, right? And if you can play on those themes where they live in a world where there are robots, right? And the robots are being manipulated maybe by a higher level artificial intelligence or something. I would lean away from having them manipulated by an actual person that is programming them to do it, because that kind of steals the thunder and the impact of it. Because if the robots have learned to be deceptive, that's a huge change for everything in the entire world.
Well, you see this in two stories, right? You see it in iRobot, the movie with Will Smith in it, where you see it kind of used in a way that is sort of good. So the robot is lying, but he's kind of trying to
Right.
make a difference in a way that is good by doing that. And then you see the newest Alien movie where you have the line deceptive AI.
Right.
And it is very much not good. It has very evil intent.
Right on. So I think we're coming up on about an hour now, so I think we may kind of draw this one to a close here. There's a lot of really cool ideas I think that we've kind of put out there that you can take and draw some inspiration from. And we'll link to all the sources that we had here for this so that you guys can check them out if you're interested in them. A couple other things that just popped into my head to mention. We talked about movies that mention robots and AI and that kind of stuff. iRobot, Ex Machina, and one that just popped in my head is a little different is Chappie, where it's a completely different take on an artificial intelligence gaining consciousness and how it reacts to it and how it interacts with people that I think you could draw a lot of cool inspiration from. So,
well, and we didn't mention it at all, but if that's the topic that we're going to end on, then I don't think you can end there without mentioning Westworld.
Westworld, yes. Yeah.
Because there's a brilliant
it's the science
display
fiction
of
Western.
AI and things coming around there.
Right.
But it's not really a Western.
No,
It's a
not.
sci-fi story with a Western backdrop.
Yes.
So
Right on. Well, it's a lot of cool ideas here. I think this is cool because I was glad that you actually got science fiction, because I thought that if I did science fiction or if like Kurt or Carrie or Lee did science fiction, it would kind of come from a more conventional place. And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but science fiction and fantasy have bthat been regurgitated so many times by the people that know it and like it that there's not a whole lot of interesting things that come out of it anymore. I feel like, not that there's not cool and original stuff, but I just enjoy seeing things, genre stuff that comes from a different starting place than your classic Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, elf games. You know what I'm saying?
elf games, sci-fi elf games.
Well, what do you call it? Shadowrun or whatever. But you see what I'm saying, though, because like there's this huge amount of history that goes along with sci-fi and with fantasy as well. So it's cool to see it, a different spin on it, I guess. Is all I'm trying to get at. Right on.
I don't know if I did that or not, but
I think you totally did, because the Frankenstein thing I think is really cool. That's actually cool. That's very cool. Well, I think you set a high bar for everybody else because you actually read a real book.
but I like to read real books.
I know you do.
I don't like to read fake books. They're hard to open.
True story. They have no words in them. but I think you set a high bar for everybody else to move forward. So we will take science fiction and drop it back into the inspirational sack. And once the rest of us have gone through and done all of ours, we will draw them again, which I'm going to guess is probably going to be sometime around Gen Con-ish, maybe, by the time we get through everyone, I would bet. So I'm not sure when the next one is going to be, but we will do another what we're calling now inspirational deep dive, which may not be the right word for it, but that's what we're going with and what we're calling it.
It feels right to me.
So, right on. Hopefully you guys got something useful out of this. If nothing else, it'll give you some more sources of inspiration, which is always cool to find new sources, because I find sometimes I've been in my own same ruts for quite a while that I miss a lot of things that I might otherwise enjoy because I don't have access to them or whatever. Right on. So, all right, well, as you guys know, we are still part of the Gunna Geek Network, so quick plug for All Things Good and Nerdy, episode 286, Stroke That Chin Hair.
About that.
So for those of us that have goatees or beards, stroke your chin hair. To open the show, Willie tells us about his adventure at a club over the weekend. Then it's on to the serious conversation where the gang questions if you can separate the artist from the art, something that seems relevant in today's world. Finally, the show wraps up with a rundown of this week's biggest news, like Brian Michael Bendis moving to DC and Rian Johnson leading the next trilogy of Star Wars flicks. So lots of cool awesomeness happening there, and it sounds like a lot of changes coming in the geeky world where people make media and stuff with artists, directors, and writers. Right on. Very cool. So check that out. That is All Things Good and Nerdy, episode 286, Stroke That Chin Hair.
So, hi, everybody that's still listening. I'd just like to take a quick moment to plug our Patreon, because if you've made it this far, you clearly found something enjoyable here. So we plan to keep making this content, whether you like it or not. But if you really like it, maybe you could head on over and show us a little love. We've got some pretty cool material there. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Just go and check it out. And you can find that at patreon.com/justonemorefix. Thanks.
Very cool. Right on. And be awesome like Todd. So yeah, head over.
Was that too cheery?
No.
Should I be more serious?
I don't know. I think it's fine. Right on. Like Lacey said, you can head over if you like us and want to help support our show, get access to some additional content and get access to things a little bit sooner than everyone else. Head over to Patreon and support us there. Want to thank you guys for listening and hanging out with us for the last hour here. And as always, you guys can find us at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. And you can also support us by giving us a rating and a comment over at iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And I think that'll do it for us for this week. So, as always, play awesome games and have a good time. Look for our polls on Facebook and on Twitter to help us pick which review we're going to do next. And I guess we will see you guys next week. Very good. That felt very clunky at the very end of that. I don't know why. I'm all kind of tongue-tied.
It all felt kind of clunky, but maybe it was just because I was doing all the talking.
I get a rhythm to doing them after I've done them for, you know what I mean? I've done them however 60, 80, whatever times now, whatever it is. And like I have a rhythm to it. And there are times where like I kind of feel like I fall out of that rhythm. And then I'm like all jumbled up and feel like I'm doing it in the wrong order. So although if it's that bad, I'll just go back to another episode and cut and paste and make it work. It'll be okay.
It seemed okay to you, though? I mean,
I think so. And if you want to do another one real quick, I can just record it like this and then, do you know what I mean?
I don't know what we were talking about, though.
Just a way to lead into the Patreon is all it really is. Because that's the only one that's awkward.
I meant the episode. The episode felt okay?
No, I think it's fine.
I thought it seemed
okay,
weird.
here's what I will say.
Thought maybe it was because...
Here's what I will say. It is a little bit all over the place, okay?
But I don't know. Was my book summary too much?
No, your book was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed listening to it. And I think making the comparison from Frankenstein to an artificial intelligence is kind of a cool thing because I don't think it's something that a lot of people think of because, and this probably should have been in the regular
it was like an obvious
episode.
Transition.
You're right. It is when you say it. But I think that Frankenstein is so far out of like most people's memory that it doesn't, you don't put those two together. You just don't make that connection. I mean, once you say it, it's very obvious. You know what I mean? But like, there's actually, as soon as you said it and I made that connection, I was like, oh my God, there are so many connections between Gothic literature and like straight up science fiction stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Science fiction is all about morality.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's every single one of them is like a cautionary, well, maybe not every single one. The ones I like are cautionary tales.
Well, the other part of the problem is
science and ethics.
Sci-fi is very broad anyway as it is. You know what I mean? Like I got mystery investigation. Do you have any idea how broad mystery investigation is? It's like, all right, so you need to have a mystery and then you have to solve it, but that could be anything. You know what I'm saying?
If you have a mystery and you just ignore it, that is not the right story.
Right. So I think it was fine. I did think it was like a little bit all over the place, but I think it works when you're talking about inspirational stuff because we're talking about different pieces of media. Hey, we'll talk about this comic book. Hey, we'll talk about this picture.
See, I didn't really think ahead of time about how any of it was going to go together. I just thought, here are some things that I like.
It's all good.
That are in the sci-fi genre.
Right.
So then
the other thing is, though, it's the first one of this that we've done. So, I mean, even if it wasn't the best, we're going to get better as we go along. Do you know what I mean? Right. So the other thing is my vision of it initially, too, was that we would have more people here to ask you questions. You know, I mean, and this one it's just me and you, so it's just me asking you questions or whatever. But I really feel like there wasn't a whole lot of questions to ask because you put time in and it was like it's very well laid out. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, you made notes and all this kind of stuff. So like the questions I had, you kind of answered in a lot of ways. Now, I'm sure as I sit here, if I was to listen to it, I would have more questions, but I don't know what those would be right now. But I think it's fine. So the other thing is there's a potential that as we do these, everyone that does one, it might just be an entirely different format too. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought it was a cool idea for something we could do that was different that I hadn't heard anybody else do.
I like it.
And I know that we're pretty good at like just sitting around and shooting the shit and coming up with ideas and whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because like part of my initial vision for the podcast was that we wouldn't even have to just be strictly RPG stuff, that it could be like we talk about stuff and then relate it back to RPGs. Do you know what I'm saying? Which is exactly kind of what we did here. You know what I mean? Like, I'm okay with that. I think that's kind of a cool thing because there's not a lot. Like, you can only listen to so many times of like, so I have a barbarian and he's 20th level and I bought Great Cleave and now his base attack. Like, I don't want to hear that.
Interest in listening.
Right. I mean, there are people that do, but I don't want to listen to 100 episodes of that. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, so it's nice to have something to like switch.
I posted a thing on Google Plus. Whatever chat groups,
right.
There's the role-playing discussion group or whatever.
Right.
And I put a post asking about what people's favorite blogs were
Oh, okay.
For like GMing and mechanics and discussion about games, but not like fan fiction and gamey storytelling.
Right.
Like, none
Yeah.
of that. So I've had
Cool.
one person comment so far with 3 blog posts that they like, so I have those to check out. But
Cool.
I don't have a lot of time, but I was like, I think blogs could be something like I could be into because I like to read.
Yeah.
And they're like little, basically like snippets of stuff.
Mhm.
They're usually not too long. And
Right. I like him. I kind of looked at
And I
Kyle's for a
liked-
while, and it was
yeah.
kind of fun. I
haven't
enjoyed
looked
it.
at his. His is the Dungeons and
Dungeons and Donuts, yeah. His is very focused on kind of like 5th edition or whatever.
I read some of Patrick's occasionally and some of Zach's occasionally
Uh-huh.
now. So I was just like, I wonder what else is out there.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
What else am I missing out on?
I agree. Right on. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to shut all this down. I think we're good for this week. I'll release this. I'll edit it at work tomorrow. Release it on Patreon as the Raw tomorrow. Hopefully get it up on Wednesday. And then I think I'm going to try and release the actual play on Friday. I'm also going to try and get to the mashed actual play and get it cut down and send it to Kurt and see what he thinks about it and go from there. And then I would like to do feminine horror next Wednesday, or for next Wednesday if we can. I'll try and put some time in at work reading and looking at some things. I got it kind of laid out in my mind, but I think I would like to have it actually laid out on paper for me anyway. Do you know what I mean? Because that one I want to make sure we do a good job on because, one, I haven't seen anything about it out there as terms of a podcast that I can find, and I want to do a good job of it. Plus that, I think it's just such a cool horror thing. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I want to do it justice, and I think it'll be cool to help boost that Bluebeard's Bride because, like, I don't want to play that game all the time, but I think it is a very cool and inspired game, and I like supporting things that are cool and inspired in hopes that other people will make cool and inspired things. Not that they need to be exactly like that. Do you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying, though?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So, all right, cool. Well, I'm going to shut all this down. And thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at justonemorefix.